And no matter how well-intentioned your pitch is, your argument, your supporting logic and your reason, the unintended message when you're explaining something to someone, unintended and unavoidable, is that you're smarter than they are. And nobody likes that. You know, that by definition begins to diminish rapport, even if you're right.
Welcome to a new episode of Deal, your podcast for B2B sales. Thanks for listening in last week, and thanks also for coming back this week to listen, learn, and grow your B2B sales skills. This episode is in English, as we have an English-speaking guest on the show today. And for the starters, let me ask you as a listener a question. How often have you wished to be better prepared for a negotiation? In sales, we have one big aim. We want to get the best possible deal out for us. And there is one discipline that is as old as sales itself, from the old merchants in Egypt to the modern M&A transactions in our financial world, and it is negotiation. We negotiate basically every day without even knowing, sending our kids to bed or discussing with our spouse the next possible trip, or of course, even asking for a raise. So negotiation is a necessity and it's not an option. Still, negotiation, it seems, is a discipline that many try to avoid and very few master. And those who master it, they get really out of life what they want. And to help you to become better negotiators in sales, but both in life, I have a very special guest on the show today. And he's a man that doesn't require introduction for most of you, but to honor him, I still want to give it a try. So, let's take it off. He was the lead international kidnapping negotiator for the FBI. And in his 24 years of tenure at the FBI, he was trained in the art of negotiation, not just by the Bureau, but also by the likes of Scotland Yard or Harvard Law School. Today, he is the #1 negotiation coach. And because this is not enough, he's also teaching negotiation in MBA programs at the most renowned universities across the globe. Most of you might know him from the best-selling book, Never Split the Difference. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me on. It's my pleasure to be on with you today.
Chris, it's a pleasure also for me and also for the listeners, for the whole community of SDRs of Germany as well. Chris, I have a starting question for you. So help us understand, how does one become the lead negotiator for the FBI? Is this something that you have dreamt of as a kid, like being a firefighter or pilot?
Now, cliche, but sort of following your bliss, following the adventure. It was always an adventure. I wanted to be in law enforcement from my mid-teens, but my objective really was to be a cop in a city. And I became a cop in Kansas City, Missouri, and then to some encouragement by my father, and then the thought of traveling globally and getting paid to do it. And when I was a police officer, I met a Secret Service agent, and he said, I've traveled all over the world with the Secret Service. And to me, that was like, wow, you got a job where you travel all over the world? That's amazing. I put in for the FBI. I didn't know the difference between the FBI and the Secret Service. There's a big difference. And the FBI was an awesome adventure. And I was originally in SWAT. I like crisis response. I'm a decision-oriented person. I like to make decisions and move forward. I think comfortable in action is the long-range costs of that are far worse than making a bad decision, because you make a decision, you get information. And crisis response requires decisions. I hurt my knee as a SWAT guy. I was on a SWAT team. And so I knew we had hostage negotiators. It sounded interesting to me. It didn't sound particularly difficult. How hard could it be? I talk every day, and very much what this podcast is about. And, your everything underlying sales and communication, things that look easy are often very difficult. Excuse me. Sorry.
Bless you.
I meant to mute, and I'm still going to mute before I finish this. Hold on one second.
We won't cut this out. We will leave this in the podcast just to hear you sneeze, so that's fine.
Okay.
Bless you.
Yeah, but so I joined the negotiation team, hostage negotiation team, after volunteering on a suicide hotline to learn emotional intelligence. what we now refer to simply as emotional intelligence, applied effective emotional intelligence. And it was great. I loved it. And then consequently, I worked really hard at it. I was, as a friend once observed, I take instruction and I take initiative. I listen to the right people. I know who to listen to. Never listen to somebody who you wouldn't trade places with or hasn't been where you're going. And there's some really important people in your life that you wouldn't trade places with and who love you. They just don't know what they're talking about. I mean, look at, are they where you want to be or have they been there? Those are the people you listen to. And I, at the right points in time in my life, listened to those folks, became the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator because the people that I worked for could trust me to listen to them and to take initiative. And it was a great trip. It was a great ride. It was epic.
What I hear is you said the word adventure. I also learned in another podcast that you used the word entrepreneurial. For you, negotiation is something, or being an FBI agent was very entrepreneurial. Sales is also something entrepreneurial. So that's why you also started your eventually own business, your own training and teaching business, as I understood, also for sellers and people like in business, right?
Yeah, after, as I was getting ready to get out of the FBI, I went through Harvard Law School's negotiation course. I wasn't a student, but they made me go through as a student. I was still an FBI agent. And folks at Harvard said, you're doing the same stuff we are. The stakes are different, but the dynamics are the same. So when I left the FBI, I simultaneously started a coaching and training business and started teaching at a couple of different business schools to prove the concept. Ain't nothing like business school students that are applying your techniques every day from Wall Street to real estate, no matter what, to prove it. And wrote Never Split the Difference along with Tal Raz and my son, Brandon Voss, uncredited co-author, very involved in writing the book. Came out in 2016, and it's been a best-selling business negotiation book, but huge with salespeople.
Yes.
I didn't really imagine it would be that big with salespeople. And of the professions, of all the professions that study it, salespeople are probably the largest profession that really study Never Split the Difference.
Yes, and in sales, negotiation, of course, is an important part. And you mentioned it, right? So through your coaching and teachings, I think like thousands of people went through your trainings by now, like maybe hundreds of thousands of people.
Right.
And what we see and what I see in sales is that most people try to win a negotiation by giving the best argument. For example, in front of a customer, you want to give the best argument why you are the best or your product is the best. And they pursue a negotiation as an intellectual encounter. And your approach is very different. It's based on emotions and empathy. Why, help us understand, why is a good argument not good enough to win a negotiation? Why do we need to rethink that?
Oh, wow. There's so many reasons. All right. So a good argument to begin with. Nobody likes being argued at. And no matter how well-intentioned your pitch is, your argument, supporting logic and your reason, the unintended message when you're explaining something to someone, unintended and unavoidable, is that you're smarter than they are. And nobody likes that. You know, that by definition begins to diminish rapport. Even if you're right, nobody likes it. And you're now putting a time limit on your relationship because nobody likes to have anything explained to them. How much do you like it when your parents explain something to you? By and large, your parents are smarter than you just based on the fact they've been around longer than you have. Nobody likes it. And we don't care. And we probably are even more annoyed when they're right. We're even more resentful. And so logic is like beauty is in the eye of the beholder. You make up your mind based on what you care about, and that makes decision-making an emotional process. You're making your decisions based on what you care about. So instead of trying to take emotions out of the interaction with the Black Swan method, with tactical empathy, with these emotional intelligence skills that we teach, that I teach, you surf them, you navigate them, you use emotions to enhance, to diffuse instead of overcome, and really understand how human beings are wired, the limbic system, if you will, and how the limbic system works, and then how to navigate that to create long-term relationship of trust, which is My definition, great negotiation is great collaboration, a long-term relationship of trust, which is what every salesperson is after. Like, how do you develop a clientele that follows you from job to job? We also do something, there's a new social media out called Fireside. I've got the Black Swan Network shirt on. It's, what it is it's a gated community for coaching on an annual basis. We do monthly calls. I do a monthly call. We do a weekly call for coaching. I'm on with Jordan Belfort yesterday. I had Jordan on as a guest. I like Jordan a lot, the Wolf of Wall Street. You know, and he's one of the poster children for sales. And he was talking about the essential components of a sale. And, you know, there's the information, there's how they feel about you, and then there's how they feel about the company you work for. You know, if as a hostage negotiator, even if the bad guy trusted me, if they didn't trust the FBI, I can't make that deal. Now, what salespeople are really challenged with is, how does that relationship with you then go with you wherever you go? And you take a new job and they want to deal with you because it's you. This is emotional intelligence. This is how your clientele follows you from place to place. And most salespeople are going to change jobs a couple of times, move from maybe an industry average company to an industry leading company. How do you take your clients with you? It's about emotional intelligence. It's about a relationship. It's about the application of tactical empathy.
So let's imagine, let's stick with this topic, right? You mentioned tactical empathy, one of the tools, of course, in your toolbox. Everyone that read the book or has done some courses with you. So let's say we are in a negotiation or we are in a sales encounter, and we have this innate urge in us to, you know, defend ourselves, to speak up, to tell, hey, this is great because, or I have the best argument because X, Y, Z. How can we interrupt that pattern to listen instead and ask questions?
Well, start by reflecting back on your own experience. How much time do you have for somebody who hasn't listened to you? Like none. Like if you're interacting with someone and they're not listening to you, you're gonna stop interacting with them. So empathy is really about understanding what it is to the other side. How good does it feel to be listened to? How firmly does the extra time taken to be listened to cement the relationship? So that's step one. Start taking the observations. The most dangerous negotiation is the one you don't know you're in. You're in negotiations every day. Start looking around and seeing how you can interact with people, how you can see them and trigger them to suddenly be interested in you. So that's the beginning. Now, then in a sales process, your value proposition, where's it most important? To get the other side to articulate it. You know, you may be right, but how do you get your words to come out of their mouth? Like, what was your reason for talking to me today? That's a what-based question. Feels very deferential. There's great power in deference. Get them to talk about why you're talking with each other in the first place. Get them to talk about how they see the immediate future. Vision drives decision. You want to know what's in their vision of the short-term future. How would you proceed after today's interaction? What are the next steps that you're thinking about? What does this look like as you move forward? An analogous interaction, I am looking at a house to potentially purchase yesterday. It's listed for being a short sale. Theoretically, the owner's in trouble. They got to sell it to avoid the bank taking it back. We did a little bit of research on the house. The guy's had a house listed as a short sale 7 times since 2016. Looks like he's playing a game. Looks like he doesn't really want me as a business counterpart. And he's using me against somebody else. I'm being played for the fool. If you don't know who the fool in the game is, it's probably you. So how do I find out what's going on with this guy. I ask him a vision question. I'm looking for the vision of his interaction in the near future. I say, where are you going to after you get out of this house? And he's like, I don't know. And I could tell that since he doesn't have an answer for me about what he's going to do after he sells the house, he ain't selling. Dude ain't going anywhere. I'm teasing out of him very deferentially, very respectfully, what the vision for what happens after this transaction is for him in the future. And that's what every salesperson's got to do. They've got to know how they fit in to the customer's vision over the next term that this interaction may encounter. If it involves you, they'll fill you in inadvertently. They won't understand because you're not talking about price. You're not talking about terms. You've opened up a conversation very deferentially about something that they're going to give you their instinctive reaction to as opposed to a constructed reaction. And, with this guy, the house seller, what he said to me, like, I don't know, after I live with him, I'm going to the graveyard. And I go, no, really, where are you going to live? Where are you moving to from here? And then he goes, Arizona. I'd like to go to Arizona. Like, all right, so this dude ain't moving. Like, if he was going to engage in this transaction with me legitimately, he'd have said, yeah, I'm going to go stay with my kids, or, I got a retirement home, I got a neighborhood picked out. He'd have given me a very specific answer. So as a salesperson, you want to have a conversation with them to tease out what their vision of the future looks like. And listen very carefully to their use of pronouns and find out if you are specifically included in the description of the future. If you're not, they're doing due diligence, you're a competing bid, they're looking for free consulting, which is the bane of the salesperson's existence. You're free consulting, your due diligence, your competing bid. You got to know when you're being played for the fool in the game.
Yeah, they may be trying to get a counter offer to, get the better offer with their current supplier, and you wasted a lot of time with them. So, I mean, you mentioned a lot of things right now: listening, asking questions, empathy for you. Empathy, I understood, the definition is collecting basically information, one could say. That's I think your definition. The essence of it is still asking questions. And of course, in sales, we need to ask good questions. And in your book, I found an interesting quote. I give you a Chris Voss quote now. So, negotiation is not an act of battle. It's a process of discovery. The goal is to uncover as much information as possible. You already give an example of a question, a vision question, so to say. Can you give us some tips how to ask better questions, where to start?
Well, and the real issue is gathering information. And there are times of day and mindsets when questions are not the best way to gather information. Generally speaking, early in the day, what and how questions trigger thought processes. Deep thinking, as Daniel Kahneman would say, the winner of a 2002 Nobel Prize in Behavioral Economics for prospect theory and just a master of human nature. And Kahneman's got a book out called Thinking Fast and Slow. And slow thinking is in-depth thinking. And you want to get some in-depth thinking, but it's exhausting. So people can mostly only do it early in the day. Mid-morning is about what I refer to as green light time. When's the best time to make a deal? When's the best time to get information? When somebody is not worn out by decision fatigue. Generally speaking, mid-morning. Now, that may not be the only time you talk to somebody. So you start asking what and how questions, what are you up against? What are you going to do after this? How should we proceed? What's the biggest challenge you face? What happens if you do nothing? These are all great questions for uncovering obstacles and implementation. Now, in the middle of the afternoon in the evening, late at night, you need information, but you're not going to get them with what and how questions. And so when you really get good at the Black Swan method, you learn how to move back and forth between labels and questions. Seems like you have a reason for asking is an alternative label to what makes you ask. And whenever anybody asks you a question, it's critical that you find out what's behind the question. There's an entire book that was written called The Question Behind the Question. That's how important that is. Jim Camp's book, Start With No, really digs into the reason they asked the question is far more important than the question that they've asked. Early in the day, what makes you ask is a deferential response to nearly any question. It's not dodging the question, it's being more respectful. That's getting more information. It's asking a great question from someone so that you really understand what you're answering. Late in the day, if you ask me what makes you ask, I'm not going to have the mental energy to answer. So I'm going to say, I don't know. Just answer the question, which I've been known to do. And strangely enough, I've had people respond under the same circumstances into the day when I'm thoroughly exhausted. Instead of saying, what makes you ask, they've said, seems like you have a reason for asking, which is a label in a black swan method. Works in any language. It's an observation. It's deferential and respectful. There's something different about the way that it hits the brain. And I remember getting asked that late one night when I was really tired, and I immediately gave lots of great information. Again, the point of a question, a great question, is to gather information. And one of my colleagues, Black Swan trained, knew not to ask me a question, knew he needed to know what was causing me to bring this issue up. And it was via text, even better, even more difficult. And he texted me back, seems like you have a reason for asking. And I remember how quickly I shot him the text message back and how easy all my reasoning came out of my head. And I remember at the time thinking like, wow, this stuff really works. It even works on me. So this is driving at your original premise of asking great questions, which the design of that is really how to best gather information. And sometimes it's a question and many times it's a label.
So what I take away from what you said is asking great questions means often not to ask a question, but to ask indirectly with using labels like it seems like. You're also using techniques like a mirror, which would basically repeat the last 3-4 words of what was said, which is basically doing a very similar thing. Like if you would say, the product is too expensive, right? So you can just repeat the last 2 words. Would be basically something like a mirror as well.
Yes.
It's interesting. I think that most people hearing this, they would say, hey, this sounds logical. I heard that already somewhere. And often people know what to do, but don't do what they know very often. And I ask myself the question, why is it? And I mean, so many people ran through your trainings and coachings. What do you think is this one limiting belief that people need to crack in order to become really good in negotiations and in sales and also applying all those methods?
There's probably 3. Let me see if I can hit all 3 off the top of my head. First of all, it might be that, logical argument wins the day. And we're taught really badly that argument wins. Lawyers globally love making arguments, love to make an argument. And they're held up for us as a great standard of communication in the movies and TVs. And in point of fact, who really likes lawyers? So there is no logic. People make decisions based on emotion. Hearing somebody out first seems very counterintuitive, seems time wasting. In point of fact that you gather a lot of information, you really strengthen a relationship. Letting the other side go first. There's a fair amount of argument among the academics. And there's a reason why the academics are not the greatest negotiators in the world. Because they're academics. They're not out practicing it. And they're going to want you to go first with your argument, your position, high anchoring, if you will, setting a zone of possible agreement. And the real world data on that isn't good. The real world data from the practitioners are that going first causes you to lose deals more than you can really count. It causes you to waste time. That's another reason to hear the other side out. There's a pretty good chance they're going to tell you something that's going to make you smarter. You don't learn anything if you don't listen first. And deference. There's great power in deference. I think those are probably the first three things, which is about the emotionally intelligent interaction. It creates long-term relationships.
I think it's all connected as well to patience, right? I think taking the slow road. I heard you using things like slow down to speed up. I think that used frame. Is it connected to what you said before?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, understanding that patience is a proactive thing to do. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. It takes longer to do something over than it takes to do it right the first time. And when you slow down, you tend to do things more right, more accurately the first time through, and you don't renegotiate, and you don't have people stopping, communicating with you. All the things that are tremendously costly, long-term business-wise, the death by 1,000 cuts. How do you avoid the death by 1,000 cuts, the loss of time by 1,000 cuts, which just is so costly? By slowing it down up front and doing it right the first time, it was closely to right as possible.
This would also mean that probably taking more time for your meetings, more time for negotiation, creating also a space for yourself to not be subconsciously in a rush or already thinking onto the next meeting, to really interesting. It seems like you're listening to me right now, Chris.
Yeah, exactly.
Having that patience in the interaction, you need to take care of the basics as well. And this means not trying to rush through it, trying to, power through that meeting, bring it to an end, skimming through the slides, bringing all the arguments. You bring all the arguments, but you lose the customer. So I think that's what I see people doing a lot. And what I heard you also saying is, and it refers to sales as well. In sales, you want to get this yes, right? You want a customer to agree to us. Yes, I want to sign this. Yes, I want to do this meeting with you. Very often, I think it's counterintuitive, but you say that we should even seek for a no, that it's better to seek for that no. For example, in a cold call, when I ask you, I cold call you and then tell you, hey, Chris, is it a bad time to speak? You try to elicit the no instead of the yes. Can you help us explain how this works?
Yeah. First of all, yes. Yes, at best, is aspirational. At best, it's an aspiration. It's a hope. And yes is nothing without how, to start with. But yes seems to be this revered thing so much that people hear yes and they celebrate. They want to, they feel they've won. Well, in point of fact, globally, people are cornered over yes so much that the yes you got wasn't even aspirational. It was a counterfeit yes. They're looking to probe you for more information, and they know if they say yes to you, you're going to give them a whole bunch more information. And now you're proceeding on a very false promise because the yes was a counterfeit yes. And why are people giving you counterfeit yeses? Because they've been trapped, cornered so many times with yes. They're yes battered, they're yes conned, that they no longer have a problem giving a counterfeit yes because everybody else that got them to say yes trapped them, cornered them, tied them down, took away their autonomy, the basic human rights, if you will. So when you learn the Black Swan method, you're out of the yes business. In such little ways is now a bad time to talk. I give keynotes all over the world and to all cultures. And I love standing up in front of a group and I say, all right, so the phone rings and a voice on the other end of the phone says, have you got a few minutes to talk? What's your gut reaction? And there's silence in the room and you could just feel it. And a bunch of people will say no. Not one person has ever said, yes.
I was waiting for your call.
I was waiting for somebody to call me and get me to say yes. Never. Yeah. That's never happened, ever. Because we're worried. And something as innocuous as, have you got a few minutes to talk? is the precursor to this yes battery. So we started experimenting a number of years ago. What would happen if we switched no in for yes? And on the one hand, there's yes battering. On the other hand, globally, people have conditioned themselves that when they say no, they feel safe and protected. Now, no matter what culture you're talking about, like if you're an Arab, if you're an Asian, if you're a German, when your kid says to you, Dad, can I? No comes out of your mouth at lightning quick, at the speed of light, because you've learned that saying no protects you from harm. A colleague says no. No makes people feel safe and protected. They've been conditioned over and over and over. Every time they've said no, they've protected themselves. So again, this is an emotional response, Pavlov's dog, if you will. Disconnected from reality. The act of saying the word makes people feel safe and protected. Now, some cultures have an aversion to rejecting people, so they don't want to say no as a rejection of a person. I don't want to say no to reject you, but I'll say no to protect me. It's not the word, it's the context. So let's combine the conditioning, put it in a context, and say it's now a bad time to talk. And, you know, I'm gonna throw out a shameless commercial here now, because I'm hoping that I've sold no as an answer. And if I haven't sold it to you, if you're a listener, subscribe. We're going to put I've been promised we're going to put a link in the show notes to subscription to our newsletter. But this particular link will also take you to the Black Swan Group's top 10 no-oriented questions. You don't got to think of the top most likely no's that you're going to want to ask in terms of your yeses. We're going to give you the 10 most common. We give you the 10 most common for free in this PDF if you subscribe to the newsletter, which is also free. There's no charge. But we want to give you something usable right away for you to start test driving this. It's now a bad time to talk. Do you disagree? Is this a ridiculous idea? Are you against? We'll show you how to drop all those in, and you can starting with your small stakes interactions. You talked before about negotiations with your spouse. You know, you're trying to talk about where you're going to have dinner. Ask them if they're against having dinner at whatever restaurant you want to go to. Instead of, sweetheart, would you like to go to this restaurant? You know, flip it over to a no. Start using it. And that's the tip of the iceberg. And that's a way to start finding out whether or not this works. And then find out, you know, how crazy is this guy Voss? If no works instead of yes, what else works? And this is really the beginning of it. And it's an incredible accelerator. If you can get out of the yes business, you're going to find your life will suddenly start picking up and moving faster because you're not creating friction with yes. Yes causes concern over what people are letting themselves in for. So just get out of it entirely.
So we'll put the link to the newsletter and to the PDF down in the show notes. So if you are on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this podcast, you'll find it in the show notes, the link, and you get the free resource from Chris. So thanks for that. And there is one thing I will take away. If I will ever be a kid again, I want to ask for ice cream. I won't ask, Dad, can I have ice cream? I will ask, Dad, would it be a bad idea to buy me an ice cream? That's a good one, right? It should work according at least to your theory. I really feel when I hear it listening and I prepared for the conversation with you and I read the book. Honestly, I hope you're not mad if I say that, but I feel that you made negotiation kind of sexy again for me. You know, I think negotiation like it's a drag. I need to negotiate something. You know, taking energy from me. It's a draining thing. But hearing you speak, negotiation seems to be effortless, a play, and really enjoyable. And I think it's because you have this patient approach, asking questions, listening, throwing the ball back to the other party, to the spouse, kids, dad, whatever you're negotiating with. It's just such an enjoyable way of thinking about negotiation.
It really is. If you can put those two P's in that you just mentioned, patience and playful, you're going to find it's a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And you have been, you have been FBI negotiator for, 24 years, right?
Well, I was an FBI agent for 24 years. I was a hostage negotiator for 15 of those 24.
15. So 15 years on the negotiator. And now I think for 14, 15, 16 years, you have your own kind of training business. So more or less, one could say the same time, right? There is this thought that we learn through teaching. The more we teach, the more we learn ourselves. What is the one thing that you learned about negotiation that you haven't known before you started teaching negotiation?
Wow. Well, I got to tell you something. I'm learning every day. I mean, every month. And it's a fun thing that I like about the Black Swan method is I think we evolve it and it becomes more innovative and smarter almost monthly. Like we're talking about stuff now. So it's hard for me to say exactly what I learned by teaching it because I've learned so much. I think the teaching it, when I was teaching hostage negotiation with the FBI, we did most of our teaching with local police, and they wanted very practical, usable, concise skills that were not too theoretical. They had to be practical, and they had to be effective. And the Black Swan method is really, really built around clearly explained, plainly explained. I use the phrase plain English, but when plain in whatever language, because it's in 36 languages. But, Einstein said, if you can't explain something in plain English, you don't understand it. And I've learned to explain the concept just in very clear, understandable, digestible concepts. I did Jordan Peterson's podcast the other day. Brilliant guy. I love his thoughts. I learn from him constantly. And I gave an answer to a question, and he said the exact same as me, only with a whole bunch of 3- and 4-syllable academic words. And I said, Jordan, you said the same thing I just did, only used a lot more syllables. So in teaching it, from where I came from teaching it, we've always emphasized its clear and digestible concepts that you don't need a PhD to apply. You need some courage because it's going to be counterintuitive. Your amygdala is going to fire and it's going to be different from anything you've ever heard. And so you need some courage, but you don't need a PhD. You don't need an IQ of 197 to be able to use it and hear it and figure it out. Because from teaching it, I think I've learned to explain it in very clear terms.
Maybe to wrap it up, because of course, like in a podcast, we can always only scratch the surface around negotiation, and people know where to find you. People know that there's tons of YouTube videos. They can go to your trainings. They can buy the book. So there's plenty to digest and learn from you. You are a learner. You love to learn. You said it multiple times. I also love to learn. I also love to learn from you and also from your book. I heard also the audiobook, I think 3 times. It's unfortunately not narrated by you. And there is this, like, I think you got famous also for that late night FM DJ voice, at least the term for the voice. Could we do something fun for the end? Could you try to explain maybe towards the end the most important, the simplest negotiation technique by using the late night FM DJ voice by Chris Voss? That would be, I think, cool for the people to hear.
By using the late night FM DJ voice?
Exactly, yeah, exactly.
All right, so what I just did besides using the voice was the mirroring technique. And I just repeated a couple of words that you just said. The mirror is just a repetition, exact repetition of 1 to 3-ish words. And it connects people's thoughts. It helps people think in really good ways. It's not the body language mirror. I'm not imitating your body or your how you're holding your hands or any of that stuff. It's just repeating 1 to 3-ish words. It could be 1 word. It shouldn't be more than 5. Selected from what somebody just said. And then when you're using the late night FM DJ voice, it's downward inflecting the whole way. In order to do that, which can be more difficult for women than men, all you have to do is drop your chin. And dropping your chin, man or woman, voice high or low, gives you that downward inflection when you talk. And then what I did in the mirror, I also, at the end, I put an upward inflection, even though I was using a smooth, calming voice. And so when you can combine the calming voice with an upward inflection or even a smile, now you're really creating a great alloy, a mixture of elements that people really feel very engaged with and like to continue the conversation with you.
And that shows how important it is to practice not just what you say, but how you say it. That was my try to use the late night FM DJ voice.
That's right.
That's right. Was it good? Okay, perfect. Very great. This is a fun conversation. Let's wrap it up. I have one question for you as a rapid fire question. Every of my guests get like a wrap up question. I also have a wrap up question for you, and the wrap up question is: what is the real impact that you want to have on the world with all the negotiation teachings?
Peace through prosperity. You know, the better business there is in the world, the less conflict there is. One of the books I'm currently reading is called Chip Wars, the evolution of the transistor chip, the microchip, computer chips. And they make an observation in the late 60s, early 70s. They said the U.S. military lost the war in Vietnam and the chip industry won the peace. And that's really the answer. Governments win and lose wars. Militaries win and lose wars. Winning a war doesn't win the peace. I mean, if the United States of America hasn't proved that over and over again, of the wars that we've won and lost globally, you can't point to a time when the military won a peace. And if peace was ever obtained, it was because businesses came in and brought prosperity and jobs and better lives to people. And the conflicts go away. The war against communism in the 70s that the U.S. was, even into 1980 under Reagan, that we believed we were fighting. But in Southeast Asia in particular, communism didn't spread into Singapore because of the military. Communism didn't spread into Singapore because the chip industry came in and gave people better jobs. There isn't communism in Vietnam now. South Vietnam is very entrepreneurial. Not because of the military, but because businesses flourished. So negotiation is about helping businesses flourish and giving people better lives through better business, getting people, the peasants that were unemployed or working on farms. Working in a chip factory was a step up from being unemployed and destitute with nowhere to go. So, yeah, peace through prosperity. Build businesses globally and let businesses and industries and free enterprise and entrepreneurs win the peace.
Peaceful prosperity. Mic drop. Chris, this was it was a philosophical and deep end to a dynamic conversation, I would say. We also already shared the newsletter. We shared the no resource with the questions where people can find you. What is your favorite way of finding out more about Chris Voss?
Well, after you subscribe to the newsletter, I'm on Instagram. It's at the FBI Negotiator, the FBI Negotiator. Post a fair amount of stuff on Instagram, and that's another resource. Got a lot of resources. The newsletter is really the gateway to all of them. So get the no-oriented PDF, top 10 no-oriented questions, and then go walk through the gateway, the newsletter, to everything that we have.
Perfect. We'll link that in the show notes. So if you are listening, hit it up. Subscribe for Chris's newsletter, and you get the free resource. Chris, thanks for being here. It was a pleasure. I was looking forward to this for a couple of weeks, for a long time. Finally, we made it. If I'm in Iowa, are you actually located in Iowa still?
Not anymore. Yeah, I actually live in Las Vegas these days.
Las Vegas. Oh, I'm in Las Vegas in end of March for a sales kickoff. So I'll be there like in 2 months. So
hopefully we see each other.
Then thanks a lot. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and see you soon. And thanks for being on the show, Chris.
My pleasure.
So, this was Chris Voss from Never Split the Difference on the Deal podcast. Honestly, I was looking forward to this conversation for a long time. Of course, Chris is a high-profile guest on the show, and I learned a lot. I think you learned a lot too. Just like really seeking, for example, that no, being patient, asking questions, really being interested in the other person and understanding why they are asking a question. Understanding what is the intention behind the question. Using the mirrors and the labels instead of asking how are you, asking it seems like you are feeling happy today. So instead of asking directly, asking indirectly, and all those interesting cues that Chris mentioned. So I hope that you like the podcast as much as I did. As Chris mentioned, there is a link so you can subscribe to his newsletter and get also that new that PDF. And of course, if you like the content, if you want to support me in my work, if you want to support the Deal podcast, then subscribe. Give me 5 stars on Spotify, send me a nice review on Apple Podcasts, or hit me up on YouTube, give me a like, subscribe. That's how you can help me to grow the podcast and reach more listeners. Everything else is free of charge for you. This was exciting. I will have a nice evening celebrating being Chris being on the show on a Deal podcast. We see each other next week again on the show. Have a nice week. Catch you soon. Stay classy, sell more, be awesome.